Hello, everybody. Welcome to Vintage Books Live. We are going to be talking tonight with Kristin Burchell, who is the author of the new book, Court of Venom, that just came out in the last couple of weeks from Ooligan Press. And Ooligan Press is one of our local publishers. So that's kind of exciting to have local author, local publisher at the same time. And so I'm just going to start out tonight by asking a question that you will all, if you've been in these interviews before, recognize, but I like to start out with it. What is the story of this book, and how did this, not so much the story in the book, but how did the book come to be?
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for coming, everybody. Really appreciate your coming. And oh boy, this book took, it took a long time to put together, and I would work on it and put it away and work on it and put it away. And so it took a long time. And I think Tina's here. She read at least pieces of it for quite a while. And anyway, so then the character and the setting really evolved from there. But when it very first began, I had gotten into reading about kind of poisons and poisons throughout history. And then it sort of got tied in with the history of cosmetics and how those could be used both like for gain, but then also as like to be destructive, to be poisonous, and kind of I thought it was really interesting to try to find that balance. And that's kind of how my character evolved. She became an assassin who used cosmetics and poisons simultaneously. I love Las Vegas. It's one of my favorite places in the world. And so of course that became a setting that's how Iran, the Kingdom of Iran, kind of came to be. It's this decadent, both Iran and Las Vegas are this decadent oasis kind of in the middle of a desert. But in my story, the desert became this place with ghosts and regrets. And of course, I'm a big fan of ghost stories. I love ghosts, love the mystery. And all together, that's kind of how it all evolved over time. And then Bailey's here too, and she was somebody who really helped to kind of help me think about, how could I even incorporate astrology and the stars to sort of like kind of show the passage of time, but also kind of raise the question, like how much of your fate is decided by you and how much of it is preordained by fate.
And that touches on the next question I was going to ask, which is, can you give people a little bit of an overview of the story without any spoilers, because I'm still in the middle of it and I don't want to find out what happens. You're just like you touched a little bit on the setting and the inspiration for it, but if you could just tell folks a little bit more about the book.
Yeah. So Badria, the story kind of goes back and forth in time some, and we get to see her past, but then we also kind of see what she's dealing with in the present in Iran, and how she came to sort of be, she's pretty trapped in her present story. And then the past kind of tells how she got to be in this state. But she and her mother start off in a completely different place on the coast. And her mom has some magical blood to her, but Badria hasn't yet sensed that in herself. And circumstances force them to have to leave their seaside town and make their way across this desert to this place that her mom really feels a connection with, which is Iran. And there, though, they are mired in some pretty dark turns of events, and Badria is kind of forced to use her skills she's used from her mom in order to get them out of a really difficult situation. And she's using her skills that she learned from her mother, her gardening skills and her skills with poisons and cosmetics as well, to both aid them, but it also kind of leads to some stuff too.
So I'm curious about that piece of it, because I have this little jar that I got from you a while back that was connected to one of your other stories.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious what, like, clearly, like, plants and their properties, either for good or for ill, is something that kind of is at least a part of, more than one of your stories. And so I'm curious how much of that is stuff that you have researched and learned that's real, and how much of it is sort of creative stuff that you've made up for your worlds, and then just what the connection is for you personally to all this, the plants and the potions and everything.
So the little vial you're holding up is
I should
essentially
say.
a previous novel, which is A Proposal Rock, which was published a few years back. And both of those stories, so Court of Venom and which is A Proposal Rock, sort of took root around the same time when I was really interested in poisons and cosmetics and how they and their uses and their magical properties. And so they in both stories, some of the effects of the cosmetics and the plants were rooted in reality and rooted in history. But then I took a lot of artistic liberty and just kind of went with what would happen if they use this? What would happen if they use that?
Yeah, that's fun.
Because
there was definitely, I was just going to say, there's definitely an air of, I think that grounds it in a lot of reality, which I think is fun in fantasy when there's pieces of it that you know are real. And hang on, I've got somebody, oops, I'm sorry. I've got somebody in the waiting room that I'm going to let in. Sorry about that. For instance, like having the stinging nettles in the lipstick, you know, and knowing what the actual properties of stinging nettles are. And for me, that was it was fun because it helps to lend authenticity to the story, to have some of it like not completely be made up, but just that you know that those properties are somewhat real. So that was really fun to read. And
thank you. Yeah, it was fun to play with that. And also kind of the concept of, I'm a big fan of Alice Hoffman and her books.
mm-hmm.
And a lot of what she does too is she kind of suggests that, like, if things are prepared one way, this could happen, but you could have the same exact ingredients and prepared with a different state of mind or emotion, you'd have completely different effects.
Yeah, that's fun. And I'm curious, moving into just the book itself and the genre. You've done some stuff in YA before. Mm-hmm. So what made you skew this towards an adult audience as opposed to as a young adult audience? And for you, in your mind, like, what are some of the differences when you're deciding who is the story for? And
there's a YA and adult is really kind of a blurred boundary. Like I love YA, but I also love adult stuff, and like it feels like I just kind of go back and forth between the two anyway. And I had originally written this as a YA, but as Ooligan was, as the editors at Ooligan were working on it, a few people suggested, well, maybe we should try to market this as an adult and see what happens.
Yeah. And you do have older protagonists, and I know that's also often one of the things that kind of decides one way or the other. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. How much of it in the past have you experienced is just like a publisher choice, like or an author choice versus some kind of line between one or the other?
It's usually been my decision about which way we're going to go with it. And I was completely fine with trying out adults on this one too.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's a difference between the two, or do you just kind of feel like
Well, I do think there is. I think in YA there's more of an expectation of maybe kind of more like a coming of age kind of situation.
Yeah.
Like almost more, you don't want to say angsty necessarily, but there's just kind of more, there might be more emotions involved, I guess. And it might be maybe a little bit more dramatic with YA than necessarily than with adult.
And what did you feel like when you're telling a story? I mean, the one thing I'm noticing particularly in this story is that, and I'm not done yet, so we'll see if I keep on it and being correct. But I'm definitely noticing that there's a lot of very strong women in this story, and that there are male characters or male identifying characters, but they're not. At least at this point, they're not a big part of the story yet. And I wondered if that was, how much of that kind of thing is intentional and how much of that kind of thing is just driven by the story that evolves as you're telling it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to really explore the idea of like this sisterhood between all of the characters and sort of being competitors at the same time as they're like allies with each other. And that in this, where I was going with this particular story, that lent itself with women more. So the character of Petra, her best friend, kind of dealing with some, like she kind of knew how to play the game a little bit better than Badria did, for example. But then Selena being in like not great circumstances either. Well, how does she react? And so I just kind of wanted to see how different women put in kind of similar circumstances, or at least facing challenges, how would they each react in their way?
Yeah. So what would you say you want readers to take away as they're reading this? Like, what kind of experience do you hope they have?
That, well, for sure, that all is not lost ever, that there's always another way, that there's each of us has our own power, even if we don't recognize it in ourselves, that can lead to something unexpected.
Yeah.
That friendships can be found in unexpected places.
How much of that do you develop as you're going along? And how much of that do you start out? You have this kernel of an idea when you start writing. How much of the, I hate to say message because it makes it more didactic than it really is, but how much of that sort of overall theme is in your head at the beginning, as for you personally? Because I think every writer is a little bit different. And how much of that do you fold in later as you realize what the story is trying to tell you?
Well, I'm a big time pantser as opposed to which I need to work on. I've been trying to like, okay, I've got to really have the structure down first. But so yes. So that said, I've definitely, the message comes in later. So I'm kind of looking at the character. I'm looking at the base of the story and the setting. And then eventually I'm like, oh yeah, this is where she's going.
Okay. Yeah. It's always fun to me to ask that, because I think every writer is different. Mm-hmm. And I think every story is different. Like some stories start out saying, this is what I'm about. And some stories you're trying to figure it out as you go. Even if you're not a pantser, sometimes you're trying to figure it out as you go. So yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, that is something I'm kind of like, in just like my more recent projects, I've been really trying to start with structure first, and then in mind at the beginning before I get going.
Do you feel like that helps, or does it just kind of go against what your natural tendencies are and kind of hang you up more?
I'm never going to be a strict plotter. There's always going to be some playing involved along the way, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think for me personally, if I try to I'm the opposite. Like I gotta know where I'm going, and if I don't, I'm like, well, they drove themselves into a tree. Now I don't know what happens anymore.
Right. Or I just rewrote that scene. Oh no.
So do you have anything? I know this is a terrible question to ask like 2 seconds after the book comes out, but do you have other things that you're working on? Things that are maybe have a home yet, or you still not as far along in the process?
Not as far along, not for sure, not as developed as this one. Like I said, this one, this took me quite a while to write, and there's a lot of different versions all along the way. Nothing that has a real solid home right now at all. So I'm just, still playing, still enjoying myself.
That's fun. That's fun.
Yeah. Ghost stories for sure. Love those ghost stories.
Oh, yay. So for you said you're playing around, and that we know that you're a pantser. Like, what's your favorite part of the process? Do you prefer to be at the beginning of a new idea and just writing, or do you like editing? That's another thing I find, is that authors have very different opinions about which part of the process they like and which part of the process they really don't like.
Right. I think, well, for me, I think my favorite is at the beginning. Not the very, very beginning, but once I figure out who my characters are, what they want, where they're going, that gets really fun. And then I just kind of let them take me, and we just see where we go.
Yeah. And then, so you've got more stuff, and this is where I'm gonna open it up to questions. If you want to type stuff, I think it'd probably be easiest if everybody wanted to type a question in the chat if you've got one. Like I said, Brent, I know you came in a little bit later. We are recording this, and you are more than welcome to pop in with video if you want, and with audio if you have a question. But everybody is welcome to leave their cameras off for if they want to as well. So I'm going to ask, while I'm waiting to see if anybody has any questions, do you have any favorite books that have come out in the last few months, or that are coming out soon, that you would recommend to people?
I love Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I'm kind of in the middle of Velvet Was the Night, which is very different from some of her other things, but I really loved The Gods of Jade and Shadow because I love the magic realism to it. Like I said, Alice Hoffman is a big favorite of mine. So, gosh, I think it's called Magic Lessons, but I can't remember, but it's the latest.
Yeah, it is there. She does have one recently called Magic Lessons. So
yeah. Those are the ones that I have been reading lately, in the last, like you said, the last couple of months.
Yeah.
There's one that's on my list that I think it came out in the last year or two, but it's her last name is it's Gita Trelease, Enchantée. Those are really fabulous books too. They take place during the French Revolution, which is
very cool.
Mine.
Somebody popped in really actually two really good questions. So I'll start with Tina's. Did your research ever take you in a direction that made you have to change the direction of your story?
Oh, yes. Tina knows that I'm a big fan of stories and love the French Revolution. And yes, that is absolutely true. So as in some work that I've been working on, like, when I had time, I did have to change I originally wanted the story to be historical fiction, but it had to change to speculative fiction because it just sort of had to parallel what was actually happening in history, because I couldn't make it work with the story I wanted to tell. Which is another reason why I really like Gita Trelease's novels, because I think that they're kind of alternate history more than historical fiction.
Yeah. And then Brent asked how you came up with the names of the characters.
Oh, good question. I was researching, I researched different meanings of different names. And so then just kind of came up with them from there. And so Badria, her nickname in the story, it becomes Dia, which is actually in some languages, it means like a beetle. And so it became easy for her name to suddenly become this insult made by her sister. For example, some of the names I just kind of liked. I liked the name Petra. That sounded like, she's a good friend. It sounded like a good friendly name to me. So yeah, kind of a combination of like some have meanings and some.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions for Kristin before we say good night? Let's see. When you write a book like this that is successful, do you consider writing a sequel? I think that's actually just a good overall question for an author, because I have a lot of author friends, and that's one of the most common questions for them to get when they write a story that people love. Like, how do you decide whether a book is done or not, or needs another part to the story?
Yeah, well, I definitely would like to write a sequel to this one, because everybody who's made it through the story knows that there's a lot of unfinished threads to it, and so there's several characters that I would like to pick up their story for.
That's awesome. Yeah, Bailey popped in and said, will there be more?
Yeah, I would love to explore some more of the characters for sure. Her mother, but Badria's mother, I'd love to explore more. I'd love to explore the Lost Princess without giving out away too much.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And then Brent asks, how many hours a day on average do you devote to your writing?
Oh, so it's very, very ebb and flow for sure. So there's times of year where none at all. And then kind of times in the summertime where I have a lot more time, or sometimes during all of a sudden during weekends, I'll feel really productive. And I've been very, very lucky in my writing partners, and we keep each other pretty regulated also, and kind of, encourage each other to keep writing and keep producing stuff, even if it's not super regular. So there's no real average amount of hours, but it just, here and there throughout the year.
Yeah, no, and I actually would second that. I think it's really important to let people know, especially if that question is coming from a place of your own writing, that people, you'll hear all this advice of you have to write every day, and you have to do this or you have to do that. And I find that really what they're trying to say is that you have to actually do it. But the schedule by which you do it it has to work for you. It has to work for your personality, and it has to work for your life, and it has to work for your family and your work schedule and everything else. And so the whole you have to write every day or else is I think a little bit of a misleading.
It can get kind of restrictive, and then it can take the joy away from it too.
And then Brent said, last one, how hard is it to listen to critiques from your writing group or others who offer thoughts?
Oh, I have such fabulous writing partners that I've known for such a long time that I feel like we've all gotten pretty skilled at being able to tell somebody when something's not working, but in a way that's not, hurtful or negative, but just we can all just sort of accept that from each other. And it's been really helpful. My writing partners have really saved me from myself in a lot of instances.
Yeah. And then a couple more. Bailey asked if you based any of your characters on specific people.
Ooh, no, they're really all more compilations of people for sure.
Yeah. And you wouldn't be able to say it right if you did.
Well, there is that. But honestly, it really is just more like characters I've read about, people I've known, just different characteristics of lots of different emissions of different people.
And then Tina said, the imagery and the setting in your story is strong. Can you talk a little bit more about how you came up with visualizing and writing about setting and place? And I think that's a great question, because I was going to ask earlier and forgot, just like the character of the lost, the desert, and this oasis in the middle of the desert is pretty pivotal to the whole story. The location becomes almost a character in and of itself. And I'd be very curious how that process happened for you.
Just, it started with the ghosts in the desert and the witches in the desert, and then that they just sort of, their personalities, I guess, just sort of bled into the desert itself. And my husband was actually reading through tonight, and he said, "Oh, the wind's a character," and I'm like, "Oh, I didn't intend that," but he goes, "Well, it is." It just kind of, it's sort of
yeah, that's great. Does anybody else have any more questions before we say good night? I'm so pleased that you could join us on such short notice, and I really appreciate everybody who popped in to hang out with us tonight.
Yes,
I have to put the little bit of a plug in that we have the book at Vintage Books, and I think I have to drag Kristin in to sign the book, but we will have a signed book at some point. So, and then also we can order it for you too if we run out at all. Really happy that you could all come.
Vintage Bookstore in Vancouver is this awesome.
Oh, thank you. I think so. And it's funny because I've been there for almost a year now, and I have to realize that, but I was such a fan for like 20 years before I started working there that I'm just like, yay. And I forget, oh, well, this is sort of shameless self-promotion now, but it comes out of a place of not. So
it's a fantastic store. So if you can get there.
And the people are all very great too. And I've been enjoying working with them. So Thank you all for coming. I'm going to end the meeting now. I really appreciate you all being here. And thank you, Kristin. I'll have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Christy. And thanks, everyone, for coming. Bye.
Bye.